Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to reintroduce to you now. Dr. Jay Wrigley is a returning guest on our show. Be sure to check out his first appearance on episode 418 on Boundless Body Radio. Dr. Jay Wrigley is a functional medicine doctor with almost 30 years of experience of healing patients with underlying hormonal imbalances through targeted diet, lifestyle, and pharmaceutical-grade supplementation protocols. Dr. Jay Wrigley's first focus is always on his recommended hormone optimization diet. He believes strongly in pairing his diet with high-quality, all-natural supplementation to combat nutritional deficiencies created by the practices of our current agricultural system and to correct any hormonal imbalances caused by poor nutrition, illness, and stress. Dr. Wrigley takes a holistic approach to tackling the hormonal imbalances that impact weight gain and weight loss, female hormonal imbalance, digestive disorders, and more. He utilizes low-carbohydrate diets, such as ketogenic and carnivore diets, and nutritional supplementation as a foundation of his practice. You can find him on his website at www.drjwrigley.com or on Twitter and other social media at Hormone Diet Doc. Dr. Jay Wrigley, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you back to Balanced Body Radio.
Casey, glad to be back here. See you again, and look forward to this.
It's going to be awesome. I had such a great time chatting with you before, all about hormones. And I think when I hear you explain the interaction between hormones, you make it sound so maybe not simple, but it's easy to understand, which I really appreciate. I am so weak in this area. For all of the people that we've talked to that are experts in this topic, the interplay between estrogen and cortisol, it gets so perplexing to me. I'm so glad to have you back on to help make some sense of it and make it a lot more simple for us.
Yeah, I enjoy that. That's the way it should be. I'd say two things about that. One is, I'm always reminded when I get a question like that, the Latin word for doctor is called docere, and that stands for teacher. And this is what's missing a lot in the healthcare organizations today is that the doctor is, if at all, not, playing that role of teaching their patients about, their issues, what are the options of getting well, and how do you approach wellness, as opposed to we've become more of kind of a disease management system where, let's find the prescription medicine that best suits some symptomatic relief of what you're dealing with. And if that works, then let's just keep you on that for the rest of your life. And in no way in my mind is that, addressing the root cause of the problem, nor will it ever. And then you can add on to that, what's the long-term effect of being on some of these medicines and combinations of medicines for a long, long period of time? We don't even know that yet. So, going back to what you said is, I pride myself in trying to take on that role of teacher, and that means explaining to people, especially the wheelhouse that I work in, which is largely, women between 40 and 65 who are in some way or fashion, even, well, I'll just say it that way, in some way or fashion, there's a hormonal restructuring landscape change that is taking place and what we call the beginning of perimenopause that is going to be a huge factor in this woman's life and her health for the next 25 years. And if you don't get on top of that, there's a lot of things that you can't accomplish while you are not in a good state of hormonal balance. So a lot of times what has to happen first is you've got to take care of those issues, because you're not going to be I probably get approached more than anything for weight loss. And let me tell you, Casey, again, if you were just to take you're a 50-year-old woman who is either just entering menopause or just about to enter menopause. And she thinks that just by going out and following a low carbohydrate diet, she's going to lose all this weight that she saw somebody down the street lose. And I'm here to tell you that I hope so. That'd be great, but that's not usually the way it plays out because there's so many hormones involved in that are changing now, and every one of these hormones has some kind of role in your metabolic function. And so, as they're declining because the body no longer wants to support childbirth, that comes along with a lowered metabolic rate because of all these falling hormones. So you can't just go out and eat a low carb diet and lose weight like other people can because the rules of the game have changed. They've moved the goalpost, and now it's not any harder necessarily, but you just can't use the old playbook. You got to change up the how you do this to support to get you back to be a fat burner and get more energy and sleep better and all that kind of stuff.
It's such a different context. I think about the difference between somebody who was always metabolically healthy. Maybe they had been, following all the right rules from the very beginning. Maybe their parents were up on this stuff and they were feeding them the right thing through childhood and adolescence and then into adulthood versus somebody who is arriving at that age and they didn't have that advantage like most of us. We were brought up on low-fat diets and ate tons of garbage, and we're in a totally different state where low carb might be able to help, but we're going to need additional things like supplements, like we mentioned in the introduction. There's other things that we're going to need, and that's why, again, we're just so grateful for people like you who are able to point those things out and know how to steer people in the right direction, how to individualize things to make it really personable for different circumstances.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And why not? What that I say the why not is that one of the most frustrating things is that we for conventional medical doctors or the long-standing allopathic community of medicine, which is really kind of has its roots in the beginning of the creation of pharmaceutical medicines back in the late 30s and 40s. Then everything shifted away from, before that, your toolbox as a doctor was diet, exercise, maybe if you had an understanding of botanical extracts and plant medicines and things like that, and lifestyle changes and all those kind of stuff. Now that's kind of moved into, oh, we've got a script for that, so go fill this down at the pharmacy kind of thing, and that is not really helping too many people.
Yeah.
And most people have either themselves or a family member who they're watching them walk down that road, and it's really not doing a whole lot of good, except for their medicine cabinets keeps filling up with these little orange bottles of stuff that they got to swallow every day. But the yeah, I'm going to leave it there, kind of see where you want to go with the next question.
Well, I was just thinking that's why it's so savage what you're doing. I mean, you're living in the Dominican Republic, you're working through people through online means, you're not in the traditional system accepting insurance like most doctors. You recognize the problem and thought to yourself, like, yeah, these people need doctors, but they do need coaches, like you mentioned. And in a 7-minute appointment with a patient, what kind of coaching are you going to be doing? All you have time to do is write that script. So I really love what you've done and the way you kind of flipped the script on all of that. And last time you were on, you told us a little bit about your professional story, which I would also like to get into. But I think I was a little bit naive to the fact that you had your own health story that you had to go through, and we didn't really get into that. So I would love to hear, what was your own story through health, and how were you able to reverse a few things that weren't really going the right direction in your own life?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. It's always I think it's always helpful for people to hear that for a couple of reasons. One is everybody likes, a success story. Also, I think that it's a real advantage to when you're working with a doctor to know that, at some point this doctor was in your shoes, and knows what this is about. And so, if you're taking a doctor who, and this is hard to say, I was going to say, if you're taking a doctor who's like in super good metabolic and hormonal health, that's been practicing for a lot of years, then you have to stop right there and go, well, I don't know very many of those. I don't know very many of those at all. But if there were, that would be one thing, and he or she would still have a disadvantage because the patient's going to be like, well, you've never dealt with this, right? But to be working with a physician coach uh, that has had to do this for themselves, and then can now look back and go, wow, let me help you. And the main way to help you, because I don't believe that the protocol or the roadmap to what most people are looking for is all that difficult at all. What it is why why resist letting someone help you, and help you in a way of not wasting your time and money over and over again by jumping down this rabbit hole only to find out that didn't really do it. And then you hear the next thing on the internet or the next person on social media who says, oh, but you got to do it this way. And you run down that rabbit hole and it didn't work out. Or you're playing Dr. Google all the time. And so you're getting confused because there's so much information. But there's also the likelihood, I see it every day with patients who come with a grocery bag full of supplements that they're taking, which is so wrong for so many reasons. One is most people don't know the don't know a whole lot about supplementation and how from the sourcing of the raw material to get it, to manufacturing it, to is it regulated, to that you have to show that what's in the bottle is actually in the bottle, and that there's not other stuff in the bottle that you didn't put on the label. None of that. I mean, this is not a regulated industry at all. Now, the companies that physicians like myself use are they design and build products primarily for physicians to use in clinical practice, or in my case, I have an online pharmacy that I can point people in the direction to. So I have the benefit of only work with companies who are designing things for clinical practice, and they have to be third party certified. They have to be tested by a third party that doesn't have anything to do with this company. And they have to be assayed, and they have to be verified that exactly what you said is in that capsule is in that capsule. There's nothing else in that capsule that's not supposed to be there. And the exact amounts that you said were in that capsule proved to be true. So that's really important. And that's not happening a lot when people are just going, oh, I heard this was good, so I'm going to go pick up some of this. And then it gets really expensive because you're taking so many things that now you're going, well, I'd do better off if I just went shopping for my vitamins at like Walgreens or Costco or something like that. Then you're buying, garbage. You're buying stuff that has no regulation, no third party testing, no anything on it, and it looks like a great price. But you get what you pay for. And in this term, in this conversation, there's twofold. One is you're getting something that's not really going to do for you what you thought it was going to do for you. Number two, you're liable to be doing something harmful to yourself because you're swallowing something and you don't know anything about it or where it was made or where it was sourced from or anything like that. So, and then the third part of that is when I brought up the grocery bag full, your body doesn't work that way. Your body, I mean, if you start throwing down 30, 40, 50 capsules a day of all these things that you heard were good for you, let me tell you what's happening here. Your digestive tract and your liver and your kidneys have to deal with all that. They have to like that. I don't care if it's good for you or not. You're putting them on overtime to deal with this shotgun effect, hoping that if I take a little bit of everything I heard was good for me, something's going to stick, and I'm going to feel really good for it. Does not work that way at all. Matter of fact, you're probably going to feel a lot worse because you're sitting around all day long digesting capsules and tablets of supplements, and your body does not want to be doing that at all. So I don't know where we were going with that, but I take that really personally because supplementation is something that in and of itself, that conversation could go on for a week for me. But it's really as simple as this. I get really frustrated with the crowd that I play with on social media, which is mainly in the doctors high up in the metabolic health field, um, and they, these are really, really smart people um, who have decided for themselves one particular low carb diet or another, maybe keto, maybe carnivore, maybe a combination of keto, carnivore, paleo, whatever. And I hear them continuously say, um, you don't need to take supplements. If you just eat the right diet, you don't need to take supplements. Well, I can't help it. There's two reasons for somebody to say that if you're a physician. One is you're saying that is because you don't know a damn thing about supplements because you didn't get any of that taught to you in medical school. You had a 2-hour lecture one day in medical school that ran through the basics of nutrition, but that didn't even bring up nutritional supplementation. So that's one. So they don't want to play and talk about something that they have not educated themselves in. The other one is this, to use the argument that if you eat a really, really good diet, you don't need to supplement because you're getting everything you need. Well, that doesn't hold any water because over the last 30, 40, 50 years, we have eroded the topsoil on the most of the entire planet to the point where all of these minerals, trace minerals, and phytonutrients have been washed away from overcropping these fields. It used to be back in the day when farmers really, I don't want to say that they don't care now, but it's just not economically feasible, I guess. But you would only plant a crop of something once every 7 years. And you would let that other period of time for the soil to regenerate and to get all the nutrition back in it before you planted this crop again. Now we crop this every year, every year, every year. And so there's hardly any nutrients left in the soil in the first place. So even if you're talking about grass-fed beef, well, this cow is eating a bunch of what may look like good green grass, but there's not a lot of nutrition coming from the soil to get into that grass. So nutritional supplementation now becomes more to look at as no longer do I believe that like it might be a good idea. I think it's an absolute necessity because more than likely you're deficient in something. And the big ones being like magnesium, like nobody's getting enough magnesium in their diet today. And magnesium runs about 600 different biochemical pathways in your body. So if you're deficient or even on the low side of magnesium, your machinery is not operating optimally at all. And then that goes on and on for multiple other nutrients. So, we need to stay on top of that, make sure Now, that's kind of like to me, the spoiler, the kind of the bad news, the taking the uh, oh, we're all doomed and there's no nutrition left in the soil or whatnot. I like to spin that in a positive way. And that is nutritional supplementation can be such a useful tool to drive specific pathways that are not functioning as well as they should be. Or another way to say that is um, you can actually, there's studies all over the place where you can affect your um, genetic or your gene expression with nutritional supplementation. And what I mean by that is that for every gene that you have in your body, and some of them may be that you're prone to something like diabetes, or you're prone to Parkinson's, or you're prone to uh, migraine headaches, or whatever it is, this gene can be turned on or off by numbers of factors. If it's in a neutral position and right now it's not bothering you, but you go out and you eat a garbage diet full of sugar and seed oil, don't exercise, you're stressed all the time, you don't get any sleep, you're taking in lots of toxins either through your diet or just because of the environment that you live in, you can actually switch that gene on and raise your risk factor for developing that issue probably 10 or 100 fold. On the other side of that, you can use targeted nutritional supplementation with somebody who knows what they're doing and can take your history in a way that would know where this needs to be focused. And you can turn off a gene that's been turned on like that. And it gets even better. You can take a gene that you'd like to be turned on, like a gene that helps you with running better function of mitochondria so that you oxygenate your cells and burn fat and produce energy better and things like that. You can move the needle towards turning on genes that support optimal mitochondria health or microbiome health or whatnot. So there's so many things that you can do in nutritional supplementation. And it's because of the fact that for the most part, it's completely safe. And if it's done correctly with the right type of nutrients, it's extremely effective. Now, there's a handful of nutrients. And again, this is why you would want to work with a doctor that can be toxic at a certain level. We know that if you go out and take probably 50,000 international units of vitamin A every day in its active form, that's probably not a really good idea. And you probably will show up with some vitamin A toxicity symptoms. But first of all, nobody really does that. And number two, um, your doctor, if you let your doctor tell you the one that you could use a little bit more vitamin A, he's going to make it very clearly that let's stay away from high dosing and things like that.
Yeah.
So I could go on and on and on, but nutritional supplementation now becomes something that is it's a great thing to have in your toolkit. And I use this analogy a lot of that, a lot of the doctors that most people are going to and have been all of their lives, if you really look at what's inside of their toolkit, um, it's quite disappointing and sad because it's a combination of what pharmaceutical drug fits this particular case that we are seeing. We have something in medicine that's called the standard practice of care. And what that is that if you come into a doctor with these sets of symptoms and you get testing and that test lines up with these symptoms enough that you can actually make a diagnosis and put a name on this problem you're having, then there is a standard care practice that would suggest that you have to treat it this way. And if you step outside the box, and treat it in a different way, you just threw up a red flag. And if you do that enough, the hospital administration will catch wind of this and go, okay, we've got a rogue over here. We got a renegade doctor who's playing outside the box, and that can lead to all kinds of problems, including going before the medical board or whatnot. So that's the way so in their toolbox is what we were talking about, is they've got whatever they know to prescribe to stay within the standard care of practice for whatever condition they're treating. And then the other tool that they have is surgical procedures for the surgeons who go off in that way. Well, that's a weak toolbox. So in functional medicine, what's so much more fun about that is I've got a big toolbox. I've got a vast knowledge of the way to use nutritional supplementation to drive a particular pathway or calm a system down, like your adrenal glands producing too much cortisol. I know how to give you something that's going to dampen and stop that overproduction of cortisol so that you're not inflamed anymore, and that we can take the parking brake off of you not being able to lose any body fat, because in the presence of cortisol, you're not going to lose any fat at all. Or if I need to drive a woman's progesterone level up because it's testing a little bit low, and we're not at the point where we need to use something like bioidentical progesterone therapy, something called pyridoxal 5-phosphate, which is the active form of vitamin B6, which is called pyridoxine, and not pyridoxal 5-phosphate, is wonderful at feeding the ovaries to do a better job at letting a woman's body produce more of her own progesterone. So, nutritional supplementation is great to have in your toolbox. The understanding of botanical medicine is fantastic. It's unfortunately that doesn't get more press nowadays, because if you think about it, 90% of the drugs that are prescribed on the market today were first found within a plant. Problem is that scientists figured out what chemical in that plant made the biggest difference in its action on something. And so they isolated that one chemical property, and then they took it back to the lab and learned how to synthetically create it, which makes it even worse, because if you don't think the body doesn't understand the difference between something that's synthetically created and something that was found in nature, even though they might be the same molecule, you're kidding yourself. But more importantly, what we're finding out more and more, and the Chinese and people have known this for thousands of years who practice botanical medicine, is that all of the other phytonutrients or phytochemicals or things that were in that plant, along with that chemical that they extracted, were there to make sure that if you took that as a medicine, that you didn't get side effects, and that you didn't get toxicity, and that it didn't overload your liver or cause other problems. It was a check and balance system. But now when you remove that one component out of there and go give it to somebody, this is why you see drug commercials that spend 80% of the whole commercial telling you about all the side effects that you might get, and call your doctor if this happens. Well, that wouldn't happen if you were taking that chemical in the presence of the entire plant that it came from in the first place. So again, another thing to put in your toolbox. Then there's, lifestyle coaching and teaching and on and on and on and on. So I'll stop with that. But I'd like, most doctors and most people, I believe, would like to have a doctor who had a better toolbox, had more to offer them at the end of the day, and go, listen, we can approach this in a number of different ways. What are you most comfortable with? And if you're going to ask me, what do I think would be the most effective route to go to deal with what it is that just seems like, better way to do it.
That's amazing. I love all of that. It's this time of year that I always resubscribe to some TV service so I can watch a few football games every now and again. I always forget how insufferable the drug commercials are and how long they go and all these side effects. When I'm not watching TV, I never see them. And you turn it back on in first game. It's like,
Exactly.
oh my goodness, it's so obnoxious. I love all of that. I think that's fantastic. And both of us are advocates of low carbohydrate diets. And I tend to think of a low carbohydrate diet as something as like 150 grams of carbohydrates or lower, somewhere in that ballpark. If you've got chronic disease, metabolic syndrome, you should probably be a little bit more on the strict side. If you're active, maybe you can be a little bit more on the liberal side. And I'm thinking about your toolbox. And that to me, that's a pretty significant tool. That's like your sledgehammer, and there's other things to use. I don't know how you feel about that, but I'm wondering like when do you know that a low carbohydrate diet pushing in that direction, basically like focusing on fats and proteins, don't eat cake and candy and drink soda all the time. When does that like for you show that that's not quite enough and that you do need to use further tools, like especially with the women that you work with, they're in that age frame, the 40, 50,
Yep.
60 age, like when you know that low carbohydrates good and that's fine, but there's more things that need to happen.
Yeah. That's a great thing. And that's kind of wow. How many hours? Yeah, because
All day.
I'm kidding, Casey, but that's I am so passionate about that. And that's been wow, you know how we might want to tie that into this? I'm trying to think what would be the way to go first. I think, I mean, if you're okay with this, you asked me earlier to tell you a little bit about my personal, you know, thing. And if I give you kind of the Reader's Digest version of that, it'll lead perfectly into where I want to go with the question that you just asked.
Amazing.
So I'll give it to you shortly. So what happened was um, more, a lot of it was just the typical physician burnout. I had been practicing and running a big clinic that I set up in Charlotte, North Carolina for 20 some years and had just gotten to the point, it wasn't all bad. It was kind of a combination of two things. I was kind of burnt out on just the the over and over expectation that here's how my day's going to play out. I'm going to be walking people back into my office, sitting down, talking to them about their specific issues, and then working out some type of a treatment plan. And um, I realized that a lot of the work that was really paying off had so many similarities to it. Especially around the foundations of lifestyle, and you need to clean up your diet and all this kind of stuff. But somewhere in there, I also was just kind of like, wow, this is a long time to do this. So at that moment, I'm having that thought, and then I don't remember the day, or actually, I do remember the day. And I actually put this on social media. The day was the my father had passed away from, well, it started with diabetes, with type 2 diabetes, and then it got so bad that he got pancreatitis, and that ended up turning into pancreatic cancer. And if you know anything about that, that's a death sentence. That's
Not great.
probably the hardest cancer that to ever think that there's going to be a positive outcome. But through going through that process with my dad, which probably lasted 8 months or something like that, I remember the day that we had taken my father and had him cremated. My dad was an avid golfer. He had retired and moved to a little town in North Carolina called Pinehurst. And if anybody plays golf, they know Pinehurst because
Legit.
it's the golf capital of at least the East Coast. Um, so I remember being out, and he lived in a house on the second hole of the number 2 course of the Pinehurst Country Club. And so the number two course is the course where they play the big events, like if they're going to do something like the U.S. Open or whatever,
Yeah,
it's on course number two.
that's right.
So my dad happened to live across the street from hole number two on the second course at Pinehurst Country Club. And so um, me and my sister decided that we felt that my father would really appreciate it if we took his ashes and we went out onto hole number two and we found a sand trap and we basically
Ah,
just scattered his remains in a sand trap because the remains look just like sand anyway at that point after they've
wow.
been burnt and crushed. But I remember that day because my sister took photos of me opening the bag and pouring it in there. And that was my wake up call of like, what the happened to you? And I was like, I've been sitting here for the last 20 something years practicing, for the most part, holistic medicine, um, working around telling people stuff about diet. But back then, I was telling people the wrong stuff. Like you need to eat a whole food diet and get lots of whole grains and lots of fruits and minimize the fat in your diet and all this kind of stuff. Well, I didn't even recognize I had blown up like a balloon. I had gained basically 100 pounds, and I was like awestruck. So uh, all of this is going on at the same time. I'm kind of burnt out on practice. Now I'm fat. Now I'm not happy about that. I decided, look, I'm taking a break. I went to Puerto Rico with the intentions of like, I'm going to go hang out in Puerto Rico and get some sun. I had the time to do so. So I was down there for about 6 months. And I began to think through, okay, I'm not having this. This is not happening. Um, and the way that I've been teaching people to eat and the way that I've been eating, which I would in no way consider to be a really unhealthy diet at the time, well, that obviously doesn't work. So I began to think, okay, what do you know? What do you know? Well, your specialty is in hormonal biochemistry. You look at this all the time with your patients from how are these hormones off and how are they playing together or whatnot. So, is there a piece of this to look at that the reason that I put on so much weight and can't seem to get it off has something to do with hormones? So, I began to deep dive that rabbit hole, and it didn't take long to find out about some hormones that I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about at this point. So, I wasn't dealing, and that would be things like insulin and glucagon and things called like a lot of them, ghrelin, leptin, or whatnot. I began to piece all this together, put this together, and go, well, obviously, if you want to get your body to burn your own fat for fuel, then what you have to do is you have to keep your insulin levels really low. Because in the presence of insulin, which is a storage hormone, pretty much everything you eat is going to be stored away somewhere.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to go into all the biochemistry here. I got the big aha, and I started with that, and I went, okay, now here's what's got to happen. And I used the tools that I had that everybody had at the time. I mean, it was as simple as, I got my hands on a copy of Dr. Atkins' book and read all through that and went, that makes perfect sense to me. Like, let's do that. So I started this off on my journey of cutting out carbohydrates and keeping them really low, down below 20 grams a day, eating a lot of fish, eating chicken and steak and stuff like that. Also was in Puerto Rico, so I was in the water a lot, surfing, swimming, whatever, sunshine, whatever. And but I was keeping my carbohydrates really low and eating as much food as I wanted, and I began to very quickly find some fascinating things. Number one, weight just started dropping off. Now, that's the advantage of being a male and being in a male at my age at that time, which would have been around late 30s, 40, something like that, maybe 40, mid 40s. I don't know. But at that point, if you're a male and you go on a low carbohydrate diet, this pisses a lot of women off because
Yeah.
men will drop weight so fast that they get mad about that, right? So I started dropping weight like crazy. And I also noticed that after a period of time, uh, I wasn't hungry. And I didn't know at this point. I hadn't reached the point where I started deep diving and understanding, you know, hydroxybutyrate and the production of ketones and how ketones, when fueling the brain and being used as energy sources in the body, have this natural satiating effect. And you begin to forget about, did I eat today or not or whatnot. And that's another useful thing. So that was the journey that I started on. And I did this really, really quickly. I don't know that I should have, but I wasn't trying to like race to get this done. But I know that in 5.5 months, I dropped about 85 pounds,
Wow.
and which ended up just short of 100 pounds is when that was enough. And then I probably put on 7 or 8, uh, you know, anyway, the point of this story was as I was doing that and as I finished doing that, it fascinated me that there has got to be a lot more to this than just what I had learned there about insulin and things like that. So I began to go, really deep diving. What's the connection of what I already know about basically female hormonal chemistry? Although I know plenty about male, the male testosterone side of this or whatever. But I begin to think about how does this play into so many women that I see who can't lose weight, and are having problems with blood sugar and energy levels, and they don't sleep well. And it all began to fit together. That it's this beautiful like web or symphony of hormones that play in our body. And if you and when they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, man, I'm not sure you can't turn everything around. But I also know this: when they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, this is a rocky, rocky, rocky road, because you have to start realizing that, okay, you can get your insulin levels down. Here would be a typical 50-year-old woman. I got my insulin levels down, so I'm producing some ketones, but I'm not losing any fat. Okay, well, let's take a look at that. So you're going through the beginnings of menopause or late perimenopause, and here's what that means. Your progesterone levels have dropped significantly. Your estrogen levels are on their way down, but they fall much slower than progesterone. And what's important is not the number of either one of those hormones, it's the ratio between the two of them. So if estrogen and progesterone are getting further and further apart, now here's what's going on. Now, your body terms that as a stress. That's a stress. That's a hormonal landscape shift that we were not prepared for. And we have to treat that as that's a little bit of an internal stress on a lot of things. So we got to figure this out. But that little bit of stress caused by this is going to cause the adrenal glands to produce more cortisol. Okay, cortisol. Now, cortisol is what keeps us alive. If we didn't have it, we'd die. And it's a beautiful thing if you're getting chased by a tiger or something like that for flight or fright syndrome or things like that. But just a moderately elevated cortisol level for a longer period of time, what that does is it's pro-inflammatory. So it's going to start wherever you've got some inflammation in your body, it's going to provoke that. Number two, it is like grabbing the parking brake in your car and pulling it up as hard as you can when it comes to fat loss, because your body's not going to lose any fat in the presence of elevated cortisol for good reason, because your body's still wired over an evolutionary period of time to think that you're in danger. And it doesn't know when this danger is going to be over. It doesn't know whether or not you got away from the wild animal chasing you, or when that's going to end or whatnot. So it's not going to give up anything that it considers to be a reserve level of energy. Not going to happen, right? So gets more complicated. Cortisol's made out of progesterone. So these declining levels of progesterone that are already dropping very, very quickly, now the little bit that a woman does have is being shunted to the adrenal glands to make cortisol. So the progesterone levels are even further down. So now that ratio between estrogen and progesterone is crazy big. Now here's what's going to happen there. Estrogen competes on a cellular level. All your cells have these little binding sites where hormones plug in, tell that cell what to do. Estrogen competes against your active form of thyroid hormone that we call T3, or triiodothyronine. And that is what plugs into the cell, tells the mitochondria that we're here to reoxygenate you and provide you with lots of oxygen so you can burn stuff. The mitochondria need oxygen. So thyroid hormone's floating around in the body, but what's happened is this out of balance estrogen with no progesterone to antagonize it is getting to these binding sites before the T3 is. So T3 is floating around, doesn't have anywhere to plug in. So what happens is you're going to have a normal looking thyroid test, especially if you just do the numbers most doctors do, like a TSH level or a free T4 level. All that's going to look normal because you're making plenty of thyroid hormone. It's just not getting to where it needs to go.
Mm.
So now you begin to have all these hypothyroid symptoms, but your thyroid blood test looks normal because nobody's looking at the right numbers. So a woman is gaining even more weight, getting bloated, can't sleep at night, her hair's beginning to fall out, her skin's dry, she's getting more constipated, her libido is gone, and on and on and on. And these are all, hypothyroid symptoms. With the doctors going, nothing's wrong with your thyroid. Okay, so insulin now plays a role in that. That's a little bit too much. Let's wind it up here and go. If you just heard the picture I'm talking about, imagine the woman who doesn't understand all of this, and she's not supposed to. She didn't go to medical school, and doctors who went to medical school don't know this either because they didn't take the time. They would have had to go on and educated themselves about all of the way these hormones play. But let's take the woman who's in the middle of this experience and is just going, I don't even know what to say. Like all of a sudden, it almost like overnight, I am gaining weight tremendously. I cannot do anything to get it off. And I'm having all these other weird symptoms, like I can't sleep at night, and my hair's getting brittle, my skin's getting dry, and all these thyroid symptoms. And this is a lot. It's a lot for a woman to handle. Now, the good news is well, it is for me, because the woman who comes to me, and this is, who comes to me on a daily basis now from all over the world, the good news is they're not broken. You're not broken. You don't have a disease or whatever. You're basically like you miss the dial on the safe that you were spinning around, and it's off like this, and we need to turn it back to here. And if we do a couple of things, if we do something to alleviate some of the stress and let the adrenals stop producing cortisol, we can do that with botanicals or nutritional supplements, or even lifestyle things like exercise, meditation, sleeping correctly, following circadian rhythms, things like that. Um, or we can put a woman on natural progesterone. And what that will do is that'll also dampen the adrenals from making cortisol. And that also will get that progesterone estrogen ratio back into balance so that now progesterone is antagonizing the estrogen. So the thyroid hormone can start getting into the cells where it's supposed to be. So you can make a couple of simple little shifts with some completely safe and natural things that take this whole hormonal picture and put it back into where it's supposed to be. And now this woman can go out and get the results that she used to be able to get by just watching her diet for 2 weeks and going for long walks when she can drop 5 or 6 pounds doing that. Now she does that. She actually gains weight. So if you make those shifts, it puts her back in the game, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to tie all this back into where you were originally going with this. This is where we get into the low carbohydrate stuff. And this is where so many people are missing the big picture, but the most important part of this. And that is, first of all, we watched people go from shifting to a low carbohydrate diet. And in the beginning, that probably looked a whole lot like Dr. Atkins' program or Dr. Banton or something like that. Then we watched people go, well, if that works, then I should go even lower carbohydrate and get rid of more carbohydrate. That'll make it work even quicker. And then we saw that the extreme of that was, well, I don't need them at all. Let's go carnivore. If I cut all the carbohydrates out of my diet, then my body will have to burn fat all day long because there's no carbohydrate to turn into sugar. And so that will be the ultimate way to fix anything around a weight problem or other types of things like that, right? Doesn't work that way at all, because if you don't take into consideration where you are in things like your age, your activity level, your current medical history, and what you've got going on, uh, or I could flip it and say it in a more positive way. If you know that information, then what's really fun is to structure a low carbohydrate diet based on what's going to be the bullseye for this person. So let me go back to again, menopause again, and women, since that's a big part of what I do. Menopausal women, in my opinion, right now, have no good reason whatsoever to eat a standard ketogenic diet. And a standard ketogenic diet would be a diet that is really low in carbohydrate, moderate in protein, almost kind of low to moderate in protein, because we do know that that protein does have a little bit of an insulinogenic effect. So it will bump your insulin a little bit. So that's why the true ketogenic diet, like by Finney and by Voltec and Voltec, are written to be the therapeutic ketogenic diet, where very low carbohydrate, low to moderate protein, and then about as much fat as you want to put in your diet. Up to 80% of your calories can come in from fat. Fantastic diet for if you're having seizures, if you're having neurological problems like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, or you're a 25-year-old man or 30-year-old man who needs to lose 50 pounds, go for it, man. You'll be amazed at what will happen with that. You put a woman whose estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone levels have already began dropping relatively quickly in menopause, and have her eat the high fat part of a low carb diet without those hormones I just mentioned that all have a metabolic effect in one way or another. They help metabolism, and this way progesterone does it, this way estrogen does a lot, and testosterone is the master blaster of retaining muscle mass and using muscle to burn fat and energy and all this kind of stuff. So these hormones are coming crashing down for a 50, 52-year-old woman. You put a bunch of fat in that diet, this woman is already at that point, she is so good at storing energy and so bad at releasing energy that she's just going to gain all kinds of weight. Or at best, the best she could ever do was just stay on a plateau for the rest of her life, because that is way too much energy for a woman who doesn't have the hormonal structure to be able to deal with. That's when we get into what we call energy toxicity. That's taking in way too much fat, which becomes energy, which is way toxic at that level. You can't do anything. So those are perfect women to go, listen, let me show you how this works. Let's keep you on a low carbohydrate diet. Now, I can teach women how to play around with that based on what you were talking about, lifestyle factors, activity levels, things like that. So it could be low carb as 25 grams a day. It could be up in the area of 100 to 120 for this particular woman. But let's do this. Let's really increase the protein in your diet, which is going to provide more satiety. It actually has a thermogenic effect. The more protein you eat, the more energy it takes just to break it down. You're burning calories every time you eat a steak. So let's up the protein, keep the carbs low, and then let's modify the fat. Now, in no way am I talking about a low fat diet. We saw what happened over 60 years of that crap being taught to people. So we don't want low fat diets. We just don't want bulletproof coffee and cooking ribeye steaks in butter and adding fat to every. Let the fat that comes with the protein that you're eating, like the steak, or whatever kind of animal protein, let that for the most part be the primary fat that you eat. Now, if you're going to saute some vegetables or whatnot, you need a little bit of something. Then we can talk about some are better than others. A little avocado oil, a little bit of ghee, even a little bit of grass pastured butter, whatever. But you're trying to modify your fat, not eat a high fat diet. I'm getting long winded here, but I'm gonna leave it there. So what I'm really trying to get at is what's really unique and fun about the way that I see this and practice this now is that people call me or see me all the time, and one of the first things they want to know is, what should my macros be, or how low carbohydrate do I need to go, or whatever. And I tell them I have no idea because I don't know who you are. But if you let me get to know who you are and you let me know what your goals are and you let me know where you're stumped right now and what's not working for you, I can build out a low carbohydrate protocol, and it's going to be the right one for you. Yeah. And we're going to use protein as the lever, which will allow you sometimes, if you want a little bit more carbohydrate in your diet, all you got to do is like a seesaw. You can up the carbs a little bit one day. You've got to drop the fat down that day and almost eat no fat. You want to go the vice versa? You want a bunch of fat in your diet one day? Then you've got to go almost low carb. But you always need to keep the protein on the high side. If you do that, you're going to get where you want to get. Casey, I'm sorry. That's me not being able to shut up about stuff that I get passionate about. So.
Don't think that I'm going to stop you ever. It's wonderful. I've now been able to spend 2 hours with you. Both episodes, this one and the one previous, are just absolute clinics. Any female that I talk to with issues like this say they're getting gaslit, the doctors are not listening to them, and what you're saying is that they're not broken and they can have hope. They can work with people like you to get these things fixed for relatively inexpensive, protocol, and something that will then benefit them for the rest of their life, rather than being entangled in this medical system that's not getting them anywhere. I'm so grateful for all of your work. Like, your message is so awesome. anybody could listen to this and take so much good practical information and apply it in their lives, and also know that if they're still running into issues, they can work with you. They can figure things out, and you will hold their hand and get them through. So, Dr. Jay Wrigley, where would you like people to go to find you and connect with you in your work?
Um, let's see. I mean, you said it in the beginning. I'll just kind of reiterate that. If you're looking for me on social media, want to see what kind of content I put out there, uh, everything is at the @ sign hormone diet doc. Um, Twitter is my big playground. We're working with Instagram now, but Twitter is where I put the most. We have Facebook pages as well. My website, which is that you can either go drjwrigley.com or drwrigley will get you there too.com. And yeah, those are the places to find me. And and I would tell people that one of the great services that I get to provide for people by doing remote work that other doctors who are working out of a box in a in a structure, a brick building or something like that, is if anybody listens to this, or Casey puts anybody in front of them, puts this information there, know this, that you go to my website, one of the first things you're going to see up in the top right hand corner is something that says a free discovery call. Now, that is exactly what people usually probably know what that is, and that is uh, you want to see if me and you are a good fit to work together, and whether or not you believe that I have got the skill set and the toolbox to be able to do the things that we've talked about today. Just sign up for a free discovery call, and we're going to take about 10 minutes together, get to know each other, see if we're a good fit. Now, with that being said, I'm going to ask you also, if anybody hears that please respect that. I do get a lot of people who want to use a discovery call to have me tell them everything that's in my brain and give them a complete treatment protocol for something that I don't even know all about what they're dealing with. So don't do that. But if you want to meet me, you want to have a little chat, you want to see if we're a good fit to work together, go to the website and hit that discovery call button, and we'll find out whether we're a good fit.
That's wonderful. I would encourage all the listeners to take you up on that offer. We always offer complimentary calls as well, and I always wish that more people would sign up for them so we could, see if we're a good fit and we can help people. It's amazing. Dr. Jay Wrigley, wonderful content. So awesome, all the work that you're doing. And thank you so very much for coming on our show, making this, again, it's not easy, but more simple and more understandable. You're so good at doing that and explaining all those things. So thank you again so very much for coming on our show today. We really appreciate you.
Love it, man. It's good to see you again, Case.
Great to see you as well. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.